For over a century, it sat in a display case. In the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, a lump of corroded bronze, encrusted with sea deposits unidentified, surrounded by marble statues and celebrated artifacts, while no one paid it serious attention. It had been pulled from the sea in 1900 by sponge divers, working the wreck of an ancient Roman cargo ship off the Greek island of Antikythera. They had no idea what they were bringing up. They were looking for sponges. They found something that would change the history of science. The wreck gave up statues, pottery, bronze figures, glassware, all of it remarkable, all of it receiving the attention that ancient artifacts receive when archaeologists finally see them. And then one corroded lump, encrusted, unidentifiable, set aside, labeled, stored, forgotten. 40 years, it sat ignored, while scholars studied the statues, while curators cataloged the pottery, while the corroded lump occupied its corner of the display case and gave nothing away. It did not look like a discovery, it looked like debris. It was waiting for someone to look closely enough. In 1902, an archaeologist named Valerios Stay looked more closely at the encrusted mass and noticed something embedded inside it. A gear wheel, clearly deliberate, clearly mechanical, and clearly belonging to a device of a complexity that had no business existing in the ancient world. A gear wheel, not rough, not approximate, precision cut, bronze teeth machined to mesh exactly with other teeth and other gears that were still hidden inside the corroded mass around it, in an object pulled from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck, sitting and examined in a museum display case for 2 years. What Stay had found, and what a century of increasingly sophisticated analysis has since confirmed, is the oldest known mechanical computer in human history, a device so far ahead of everything else from its errated, its existence has forced researchers to fundamentally reconsider what the ancient world was actually capable of. And just like every other ancient artifact that produces implications too inconvenient for the conventional timeline, the response from mainstream scholarship followed a familiar pattern. Acknowledge, minimize, move on, and leave the most important questions unanswered. The Antikythera Mechanism is roughly the size of a shoebox, a handheld bronze device, compact enough to carry, complex enough to calculate the movements of the entire solar system. Inside that shoebox, at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precision cut, each one meshing exactly with the next. At least 30 gears of varying sizes working together in a single mechanical system. Gears that mesh, gears that divide, gears that multiply ratios. A mechanical system that modern engineers describe, without exaggeration, as elegant. Built by hand, in bronze, over 2,000 years ago. Turn the gears in the correct sequence, and the device calculates the positions of the sun and moon for any given date. Past, present, future. Where is the moon tonight? Where will it be in 6 months? The mechanism answers, mechanically, automatically, correctly. It predicts solar and lunar eclipses, not approximately. Using the 18-year Saros cycle, a pattern in the relationship between the lunar month, the solar year, and the geometry of orbital mechanics. An astronomical cycle that requires a deep mathematical understanding to identify and apply. The mechanism applies it mechanically. The Saros cycle, 18 years. The period after which solar and lunar eclipses repeat in approximately the same pattern. Identifying this cycle requires an astronomical observation across multiple generations, combined with the mathematical ability to recognize the pattern and encode it into a working mechanical system. It tracks the movements of all 5 planets known to the ancient Greek world: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Each planet on its own gear train, each calculation separate, each output displayed simultaneously in the front plate. 5 planets, 1 device, 2,000 years ago. And it tracks the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, a practical functionalities the astronomical ones. This was not built purely as a scientific instrument, it was built to be used by real people who needed to know when the games were coming, alongside when the next eclipse was due. All of this, simultaneously. Sun position, moon position, 5 planetary positions. Eclipse prediction, Olympic cycle, all calculated at once, through the interaction of precision-cut bronze components working together, in a system that required no electricity, no software, no modern tools of any kind. The Antikythera Mechanism was constructed either between 150 and 100 BC, over 2,000 years ago. To put that in context, Julius Caesar had not yet been born. The Roman Empire did not yet exist. Christianity had not yet begun. And yet, someone was already building mechanical computers. The next time anything of comparable mechanical complexity appears in the historical record is the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe, more than 1,000 years later. And those early medieval mechanisms, in several important respects, are less sophisticated than what the ancient Greeks built over 1,000 years bear them. Think about that inversion. The medieval clocks that historians celebrate as great achievements of the emerging scientific revolution are mechanically inferior to a device built in ancient Greece. 1,000 years earlier, the timeline does not flow from primitive to sophisticated. It flows from sophisticated to lost to gradually rebuilt. This is not a primitive ancestor of modern technology, not a rough early attempt at something that later became more refined. It is a finished product, a mature piece of precision engineering. The tolerances of its gear cutting vary measured in fractions of a millimeter. Using hand tools in bronze, 2,000 years ago, mature technology still not appear from nowhere. The Antikythera Mechanism implies in it a long tradition of development, skilled craftsmen, years of technique refinement, accumulated design knowledge, a technical culture capable of producing components whose tolerance are measured in fractions of a millimeter. Using hand tools in bronze. Where are the earlier versions? Where are the simpler prototypes, the workshop remains, the partially completed trial pieces that any developing technical tradition would leave behind? Where is the long process of trial and error that must have preceded a device of this complexity? The honest answer, we do not know. That absence is itself one of the most significant things about the Antikythera mechanism, because it suggests that what we found at Antikythera at the beginning of something. It is the survivor of something, a single physical remnant of a technical tradition that was operating at a far higher level than we have ever acknowledged, a survivor, not a beginning. A single physical remnant of a tradition that produced it, and was then lost so completely that it left almost nothing else behind. The mechanism did not survive because the tradition preserved it. It survived because a ship sank, and the ocean kept what historical could not be trusted to keep. The 3rd and 2nd centuries represent the peak of ancient Greek scientific and mathematical achievement. Archimedes, Eratosthenes, Hipparchus, Apollonius, for figures who between them laid the mathematical foundations for calculus, astronomy, geography, and mechanical engineering. The Antikythera Mechanism is the physical embodiment of that tradition. Precision metalwork and astronomical theory combined into a single working device. That is what the Antikythera Mechanism is. Not theory alone, not craft alone, the meeting of the two. A mind that understood mathematics of the solar system, and hands that could translate that understanding into bronze. And then came Rome. The Roman conquest did not destroy Greek knowledge deliberately, but the institutional structures that had maintained and transmitted this tradition of practical scientific knowledge, the workshops, the academies, the apprenticeship chains, gradually collapsed under the weight of a different civilization's priorities. The workshops closed, the craftsmen dispersed, the design knowledge, which had always been passed from master to apprentice rather than written into texts, was simply not passed on, not destroyed deliberately, not burned or banned, just not continued, and a tradition of precision mechanical engineering that had produced the most sophisticated device in the ancient world vanished. And then Rome itself fell, the institutional structures that had at least maintained some vestige of Greek intellectual tradition collapsed with the Western Empire. What remained of ancient technical knowledge was scattered across monasteries, Arabic translations, and the fragmentary record of a civilization that no longer existed to explain itself. This is the critical vulnerability. The knowledge was practical, embodied, passed through demonstration, correction, and repetition from master to apprentice, not through texts, not through diagrams, comprehends, and not allow reconstruction with the living teacher. When the last master's deed without passing it on, it was gone. Individually, each of these findings can be explained away. The Antikythera Mechanism, a one-off genius, Roman concrete, a lucky combination. The Baghdad battery, a coincidental design. Individually, each explanation is possible, uncomfortable, but possible. Together, they form a pattern that is much harder to dismiss, a pattern of ancient technical capability that consistently exceeds conventional model of what ancient peoples were able to do. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, across different cultures, across different centuries. The conventional model of human history assumes a linear progression. Primitive ancient peoples, gradually developing tools and knowledge, culminating in modern technology. It assumes that ancient civilizations did not have access to technical knowledge beyond what their supposed stage of development allowed. The evidence disagrees. The resistance is itself revealing. When a pattern of findings consistently exceeds what the conventional model expects, the rational response is to revise the model. Instead, mainstream archaeology repeatedly revises the findings, explains them away, minimizes them, labels them coincidence. The pattern of resistance is as consistent as the pattern of findings. The Baghdad battery represents a question that mainstream science answered too quickly and too conveniently. A question about the depth and the breadth of ancient technical knowledge that deserves a more honest answer than the one it has been given. The ancient Mesopotamians are not primitive. They built cities of extraordinary complexity. They developed mathematics and astronomy. They created legal systems and literature. And if the Baghdad battery is what it appears, they also understood enough about electrochemistry design, construct, and use a functional electrical cell. Imagine an ancient workshop in Mesopotamia. Clay jars filled with grape juice, metal objects suspended in the acid, gold dissolving from one surface, depositing on another. No wires in the modern sense, no switches, no gauges, but the same fundamental process that modern electroplating plants use today, understood empirically, applied practically. Alessandro Volta is credited with inventing the battery in 1800. The voltaic pile, the moment that launched the electrical age. History books name him as the man who discovered that certain metals in acid generate electrical current. But if the Baghdad battery is what it appears to be, someone else knew that first. By nearly 2,000 years, 250 BC to 224 AD. That is the range, Alessandro Volta minus 1800 AD. The gap is nearly 2,000 years. 2,000 years during which the knowledge existed, was used, and was then lost. Not gradually, not through slow cultural decline, lost completely. As if it had never been. The Baghdad battery today is stored in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, the same city or close to it, as the ancient city of Xiphon, where it spent nearly 2,000 years in the ground, full circle. Though the circumstances of its recent history are considerably darker than the circumstances of its creation. In 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, the Iraq Museum in Baghdad was looted. Thousands of artifacts were stolen or destroyed in the chaos that followed the fall of the city. Objects that had survived for thousands of years, lost in days. Among the artifacts reported missing was the Baghdad battery. It was subsequently recovered. Exactly when, by whom, under what circumstances, the record is not entirely clear. Its precise condition since the recovery, and its exact current location within the museum collection, have not been consistently reported. The artifact survived, but the uncertainty around it adds another layer to an already complicated story. Other artifacts from the same excavation, similar objects, that may have helped resolve the questions around the battery, were not recovered. Some were destroyed, some entered the black market, some are simply gone. The evidence that might have settled the electroplating question definitively no longer exists. What the Baghdad battery represents, regardless of its physical location, is a question. Not a resolved question, not a closed one. An open question about the depth of ancient technical knowledge that mainstream science answered too quickly, too conveniently, and without adequate engagement with the evidence. The most important inventions in history may have been made, and forgotten, long before we think they were. The Baghdad battery, the Antikythera Mechanism, Roman concrete. These are not curiosities, they are evidence. Evidence of a human past more technically sophisticated than the conventional model is prepared to acknowledge. Knowledge is not permanent. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall. The knowledge they accumulate does not always survive at the collapse of the civilization that held it. The Baghdad battery may represent knowledge that was discovered, used, and lost, and then rediscovered 100 years later by Alessandro Volta, who received all the credit. The Baghdad battery deserves a more honest answer than the one it has been given. Not the comfortable institutional answer that calls it a scroll jar and moves on, but a rigorous answer, one that engages seriously with every element of the design, every piece of physical evidence, and every implication of what the object actually is. The question is still open. Did ancient Mesopotamians and use the electrical current 1,500 years bear the modern world invented the battery? The evidence says, possibly. The design says, probably. And the institutional response to that possibilities is something important about how we choose to understand our past. For nearly 2,000 years, It sat in the ground, patient, silent, and changed, holding its design intact throughout every civilization that rose and fell above it. When it was finally found, we were not ready to understand what it was. 80 years later, we may still not be. For more ancient, mysterious, and hidden histories, stories of what human beings were capable of long before we gave them credit, subscribe and keep exploring, because the most important inventions in history may have been mad and forgotten long before we think they were. Until next time, stay curious,